Good Vibrations.
All right, so welcome to Good Vibrations, episode number 263. I'm your guest host today, Ivan from Phoenix, and today we're talking with some bloke called Mark Devlin about a book he wrote a long time ago called Tales from the Flipside. So, Mark, why am I here? What's going on? What's happening in the world? Talk to me. Talk to your people. What's going on?
Is it just me, Ivan, or have we done this before? I'm getting distinct deja vu here.
Me too. I was gonna say there's something familiar about all this.
There really is. So I'm very happy I accepted my own invitation to come on the show. So I thank myself for that. And this is the sixth time we've done this now. So it's a tradition. Every time I get a new book out, you interview me on my show about it. And I was thinking about when the first time we did this was, and it was the launch of Musical Truth Volume 1, which was January 2016. So we're coming up on 9 years. So almost a decade later, we're still here, bit older, bit bolder, but still around.
Yeah. Holy cow, has it been that long?
I know, right?
And 5 times we've already done this.
That's right. The 3 Musical Truth books, the 2 novels that I put out, and now this one.
Okay, so the difference now is that this is not a book that you just finished. This is something that you did way back before, but you're re-releasing it, reprinting it or whatever, and just giving a before and after kind of thing for people that have come to know you, right?
That's right. So this is Tales from the Flipside, which was my first book. So it's kind of a new book, and it's not, because it's a revised edition of the first one that I put out I self-published it in January 2007 through a company called Author House. And this is before Amazon's Create Space Kindle Direct Publishing existed. So if you wanted to self-publish a book, you had to go through a company such as this. And I got a deal which is akin to a really bad music artist deal. You know, artists like Prince and Michael Jackson and George Michael were moaning about the terrible state of the record deals they signed up to, plus all the artists on P. Diddy's Bad Boy Records label. They were saying how exploited they were by the record company and how poor their royalties were and stuff like that. And it was kind of like that with this deal. It wasn't great royalties wise, but it was pretty much the only option in those times. But I wrote this book in 2005, 2006, so it's very much a relic from the archives, from the before times. It's like my forgotten work that not a lot of people know about. And I had the idea of putting it out with this new revised edition because I thought it would be interesting for people to get a glimpse into what my mindset was like in those times. So I underwent my conscious awakening, if you want to call it that, starting round about 2008. So it was the year after I put this book out. So this one was written in the last days of my normie mentality, when I was very much part of regular mainstream society. And I was a working DJ, full-time radio and club DJ, traveling the world, playing gigs here, there and everywhere. And at the time, that was my value system in life. It was the only thing that really mattered to me, just gigs, parties, traveling, tunes, chasing women, not being very successful, but trying anyway. And that was it, the only things that were important to me. And then as I began to reshape my worldview from the following year, I realized how shallow that way of looking at things had been and how trivial it all was. And then as things progressed, I got deeper and deeper into sort of truth alternative research, and my entire worldview just started to change on so many things. And so here we are 18 years later, and I just thought, wouldn't it be interesting for readers to contrast where I was back then with where I am now, based on the books I'm now putting out? So that was the idea for it. It's a revised edition. It's got a new foreword, which is me bringing things up to date and just giving my current perspectives. And it's littered throughout with new footnotes. So that's where I home in on aspects of the original narrative and give my current perspective on it, and just make some comments throughout about how I feel about those things now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking through here the chapters. You sent me a copy of this, and you got a subtitle, subtext, whatever. Tales from the Flip Side: Exploding the Myths of the Superstar DJ Lifestyle. Check you out. And then, being a DJ is the best job in the world. Do you still agree with that, Mark?
Not really, no. And also, the mention of the superstar DJ lifestyle was not me ever claiming to be one because I never made it into the superstar DJ realms. I wanted to, and I aspired to that every step of the way, but I never made it. In fact, I used to really want to be on the BBC. I so wanted to be on BBC Radio 1 or 1 Extra, and I was constantly sending up demo tapes and sending them messages. I even used to turn up at BBC Broadcasting House and ask to speak to the programming director of Radio 1 on the reception desk, asking him to come down from his office. And of course, he never did. And the receptionist was making all the excuses. But I used to say, can you tell him I'd like to take him out to lunch and explain to him why he needs me on his station? And of course, he never turned up. And it was my greatest gift, I realise now, that the dude never turned up. Because just imagine if they had taken me on, what a bloody nightmare that would have been. It certainly would have made it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for me to speak out now about the things that I do, the true nature of the music industry and organised society and all this, if I'd ever been on the BBC. Because they would have tried to gag me if I'd had that kind of public profile and I was trying to make comments now about the reality of our world. I think there would have been all kinds of attempts to shut me up. As it is, I'm viewed as a relative nobody in the grand scheme of things now because I never made it big, and I'm happy with that. That works for me now. But back then, I really wanted to be up there in the top league of DJs, and the subtitle there, Exploding the Myth of the Superstar DJ Lifestyle, referred to the way so many people used to view all DJs. So you'd mention you're a DJ, and they'd think you're up there like Pete Tong or Judge Jules or we don't talk about Tim Westwood these days, but some American names that people might know. I don't know, Afrojack, somebody like that, bloody Skrillex, or, Tiesto or Paul Van Dyke coming out of Europe. These sort of names, Fatboy Slim. People used to assume that all DJs lived lives like that. It was private jets and champagne and wild parties, hanging out at P. Diddy's house. Bloody nightmare
Uh-oh.
that would be. I know, right? Dodged a bullet there as well. So, the intention was for it to be full of wry, sardonic humour, which is kind of my speciality when it comes to humour. And just to point out to people that not all DJs have lives like that. I mean, I was travelling around on Ryanair for the most part, shitty little budget airline, and staying in cockroach-ridden rundown hotels and having to chase the promoter at the end of the night to get paid and stuff like this. So not all DJs are equal in the grand scheme of things. That certainly was the case at the time. But the fact that many of us did live lives like that made for many a funny anecdote. And I just wanted to get those into the book. So originally, that's what it was full of, just funny stories that reinforce how wrong people's perceptions that all DJs live these crazy lifestyles is.
Mhm. I remember hearing you say something about during one of your times working at a radio station that in the early days of Destiny's Child, you got to meet Beyonce and that group. So things like that, when it's quote unquote work related, there is some mingling with the it crowd, right? But it's not a thing like you're in it. It's just it's part of the job. They look at you like, oh yeah, this guy from the station, like, yeah, hi, blah, 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 in and out. But you can at least still claim like, oh yeah, I've met these people. Is that
Yeah.
something that's in the book as well? Or was that like after you did the book that this happened or things like that happened?
I do mention in the book some of the famous people that I met, and I don't think it's the case that I could bump into Beyonce tomorrow and she would go, Mark, how have you been? Oh my God, my bro, how long's it been? Like 26 years? Because
We
I
missed
met
you at the
Destiny's.
baby eating parties. Oh, sorry, wait a minute.
Yeah, yeah. I missed you at Diddy's house last weekend. Yeah, there's a reason for that. So I met Destiny's Child in February 98. And this was due to being a radio DJ. So, as well as playing clubs all over the place and traveling around the world, I had a few radio shows. I started out on Galaxy Radio in Bristol. I started out in Fox FM in Oxford, actually, in 1990. And I used to do newsroom shifts. That was my very first job. I was the newsboy, I was an errand boy, tea boy, just doing all these little gopher jobs. And I kind of worked my way up from there onto the programming side of things. And then in 1996, I got taken on by a station in Bristol called Galaxy Radio, started doing a show there on Friday nights. And that show was quite high profile because Galaxy was a popular station at the time. So when there were new groups like Destiny's Child, I remember Sony Columbia launching that group in early 98 when the girls were all 16. They wanted to get interviews with the prominent radio DJs of the time. So there were many based in London, but then regionally, there were stations in Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, and Bristol. And they would bring us out of towners into London and usually pay for hotels and pay for dinner and stuff like that. And you'd do an interview with the artists. And as far as the artists are concerned, it's like you say, it's just a conveyor belt. Just some dude comes on, asks them a few questions, goes away. Next dude comes on. It's just another day at the office for them. But I got a picture sitting on this couch with Beyonce when she was 16. And I've reflected that it's the only time I'm ever going to be in the same building, never mind sat on the same couch as Beyonce ever again. And that suits me with stuff that I've found out. So I did meet a fair few of these artists. I met Busta Rhymes, the Fugees, Khalees, who else? Just so many others. Lauryn Hill, from the Fugees. Just loads of artists at the time. And I bumped into a few other famous people as well. I bumped into Sean Penn once, actually, at LAX airport. And it's just after his brother Chris Penn had died. And Sean Penn's waiting by a luggage carousel in LAX. And I went up to him and said, do you mind if I take a photo with you? And he goes, I'd rather not. So I just left it at that. He's got a reputation for punching photographers. So I thought, he's being an arsehole about it. So I just left that alone. I saw Michael Palin from Monty Python on a flight once when I was going out to Bulgaria to do a gig. I saw Tim Roth, the actor that was in Pulp Fiction, in an airport once. But that's about it, really. I mean, not too many claims to fame. But back in the day, I just met a whole bunch of these rap artists and R&B singers and stuff, and I was all gassed up at the time. It was exciting to me at the time because I put these people on a pedestal. But my biggest heroes back then were other DJs, so I got more excited about meeting other DJs than I did artists. So people like the aforementioned Tim Westwood. I don't know if your American listeners know, but Tim Westwood is currently embroiled in investigations by the BBC and the Metropolitan Police concerning allegations of sexual impropriety going back 40 years involving...
You don't say.
I know,
Why,
right?
I'm shocked. I'm surprised.
And he worked for the BBC. Who would have thought it?
No way.
Yeah, so he's very, very far from a personal hero to me now, but back in the day he was, because he was this white middle-class guy who'd made it big in the world of rap and hip-hop, which is obviously a black music genre. So I thought, well, if he can make it big, there's no reason why I can't make it big in that genre. And that's why I deludedly sort of pursued a career in that music style. What I didn't realise at the time is that he was a gatekeeper, and he'd been inserted into the UK rap and hip hop scene to keep an eye on it and make sure it got steered off in certain directions. And of course, he worked for the BBC, and his dad was an Anglican bishop, and he went to an exclusive public school and, had this elite sort of upbringing. But I didn't know all that at the time. And then it would be other DJs like Pete Tong is a prominent radio DJ in the UK. He's been on BBC Radio 1 since about 1902. And also Africa Bambaataa. I mean, yeah. So he came to DJ at this club in Cardiff where I used to play in the late 90s. And it was called Late Night Flavour at the Forum in Cardiff. And I did every Saturday night there along with a bunch of other guys. And it was incredible because we had about 1,500 to 2,000 people every single Saturday packed into this club. And it was just so popular. And we used to get these big DJs and big name artists in. Beanie Man did a concert there one time. And Africa Bambaataa came to play with DJ Jazzy J. And at the time, I thought Bambaataa was this sort of demigod of the hip-hop scene because that's the way you're trained to think of him. There's three founding father figures when it comes to hip hop culture. You got Kool Herc, Grandmaster Flash, and Africa Bambaataa. And so I got really excited about meeting Bambaataa because I thought this guy is just, of mythical status. Of course, I realize now with the research that I've done that he was of mythical status because he was engineered, to be thought of that way. He was inserted again into the scene. And there's all kinds of allegations about Bambaataa that have been floating around since 2016, since I put out my first Musical Truth book, where you've got a bunch of men who have accused Bambaataa of having sexually molested them when they were minors, when they were young lads. So these have been hanging around for getting on for 9 years now, but in spite of that, nothing's been done. He's still walking around a free man, and he's still getting booked to do parties by promoters. This is the most incredible thing to me. So that left a very bitter taste in my mouth when I discovered all this stuff about him or heard all these allegations. So I now no longer think of Bambaataa in that regard. And that's the case with all heroes, really. I mean, one of the central messages I have now that I put out through my books and my talks and stuff is just let go of all your heroes. You can't have heroes. Even in the so-called truth scene, don't even be putting authors and researchers up on a pedestal because we don't know who these people are. We don't really know where they've come from. They're not your friend. You can't be sure of any of them. You've got to let go of all these heroes and just be your own hero, go your own way. But of course, back then, I didn't know any of this stuff. And the current me, the contemporary me, could not have got through to the me of the early 2000s. I'd have dismissed it all and said, you're crazy, you don't know what you're talking about. And I just wouldn't have listened because I wasn't ready at that time.
Well, that's synchronistic because as you're talking, I was thinking of asking you that. I was like, in this day and age, in the last decade or so, how, we have so much movies, TV shows, and zeitgeist, multiverses, alternate realities, and changing time and all this stuff. I was going to ask you, what would you think if a portal were to open and you from today showed up to that early, you and told that early you some of these things, that, hey, be careful with all these people, da 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 da, that are big stars and all this is happening. It's not what it looks like. They're actually this, this, and this. I was going to ask you, what do you think that would have done to your psyche back then, your reaction, how you would have, responded to that kind of stuff?
I think it would have depended what names people were bringing up and what sort of genres they were talking about. So if somebody had said to me back then, oh, the R&B and hip hop scene, the sort of urban music scene is a cesspit of debauchery and depravity, and you got all these Diddy parties and all these blackmail situations going on, I would have thought that was crazy because I just loved the music, I loved the culture, I thought it was all so much fun, and I was traveling around meeting great people, going to some great parties, so I wouldn't have wanted to know. But I think even back then, if somebody had come up to me and said, oh, there's stuff you need to know about the Beatles or David Bowie or the Doors or the Rolling Stones, I think my interest would have been piqued then because that was music I didn't really have an investment in. So if somebody said, oh, there's dark occult stuff and all these dodgy family connections and stuff behind these artists, I probably would have listened because it wouldn't have meant letting go of any personal attachment to these artists or personal investment. You see, I'm a bit of an all-rounder now. When I talk about music in my talks and stuff, I've had to get to know about rock music and the 60s, psychedelia, counterculture, and heavy metal, heavy rock, punk, new wave. I never really knew much about those genres because I was always a black music guy. I liked rap, reggae, soul, funk, disco, this sort of stuff. And black music was all I was wrapped up in. So I've had to educate myself on these other artists from different genres to know what I'm talking about now. Put enough years in. So I think, yes, I would have paid attention as long as it wasn't my personal holy cows. And this is what I get a lot. I mean, I do talks all over the place now, and I might mention a group like Pink Floyd. And somebody from the audience in the Q&A at the end will say, well, I see what you're saying about the music industry being completely controlled and corrupt. And yes, I get all that. And I see all the symbolism and all the dodgy stuff, but not Pink Floyd. No, 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 no. They weren't a part of that. No, they escaped all that. They were kicking back against the system, and no, Pink Floyd couldn't be got. And they really think that a group like Pink Floyd, that's been around for 60 years, signed to EMI, recording in those world famous recording studios. They've had million selling albums, been on world tours. They really think a group like that could have slipped through the net and the controllers of the music industry didn't notice. Or they were like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll control all these other groups and get them pushing our agendas. But yeah, Pink Floyd, we'll just let them do their own thing. They can say whatever they want. And, we don't really care about them. It just wouldn't happen. And this reinforces one of my central messages again, which is everyone's got someone about whom they just don't want to hear it. Might be Pink Floyd. In my case, it would probably have been Jay-Z or somebody like that, Kanye West. But, everyone in the industry is dancing to the piper's tune of those that control it, or they just would not be in the industry. Not to any degree of fame and prominence anyway. So, yeah, I wasn't ready for that message back then. And I think it just reinforces that everyone has to come to this information and come to these messages when they're ready and not a moment before. And it's a personal journey. It's a personal free will decision as to whether you embrace this information or not. And you can't force it down people's throats. You can bring it to them. You can present it to them. And they'll either do what our friend Mark Passio has spoken about. You'll offer to them the gift of truth on a silver platter, and they'll smack that platter out of your face and say, fuck truth. Or they might just say, okay, well, leave it with me and I'll look into it. And I think that's all you can really do. Just offer people the information and they'll come to it when they're ready, if they do at all. And if they don't, oh, well, it's their karma, not yours.
Mm-hmm. All right, then. So, skimming over these chapters here, I can tell the difference, unlike your other truth books, how, there was certain progression and it resonated with me. There are things here in this that it's like, I don't want to say it's all over the place, but it's stuff that people like us of today's consciousness will look at this and be like, okay, whatever, whatever. But there is some stuff that's like, there are a couple of ways of looking at these things. Like we've mentioned before, the naive, sheltered DJ that, music is great, it's fun, and the world is all happy, happy, joy, joy. And then knowing, like, wait a minute, that's illusions. Those are, things for distractions and manipulations and certain things. So looking at some of the titles of your chapters here, I can see the title of a Beatles song here, The Long and Winding Road. Okay. But then little things like digging in the crates, the other side of the tracks, and jockeying all over the world. See, so it's like, those are all sound like fun things and part of the business, digging in the crates. I don't know. I'm just picking out these things. Oh, and then the next one. This is good too. Groupie love. Mark, why do you have a chapter in here about groupie love, man? What are you talking about?
Well, it was more my envy at certain other DJs that seemed to get quite a bit of that, and often behind the booth as well. And I never did. Well, I won't say never, but rarely did. And I got sort of a bit twisted and bent out of shape about that. So I just thought, well, there's some humor in here somewhere. I'll just make a funny chapter out of it. So I just made the point that a lot of DJs get girls, and they can have a face like the arse end of a truck, a dumpster truck. And it doesn't seem to impede their chances with women or whatever their preference may be. And there just seems to be a certain mystique or cachet about that guy that's up there playing all these records and commanding the crowd. And that's attractive to a certain type of woman, I guess. And, I won't say I never had some fun in that department, but certainly not as much as I would have liked. So there you go. Life is cruel, isn't it?
So having said that, tying that with the Destiny's Child thing, I can see where, like, oh, yeah, there's this DJ. He's not all that great, but you know what? He's a guy, and I want to get close, have access to such and such people or maybe whatever. So, that the artificiality of it. You know, they may approach some DJ and be all buddy buddy friendly and like, oh, you really, you got this guest you're interviewing? Oh, that'd be cool if I can be there or whatever. You know, just ulterior motives like everything else in life.
Yeah. What's intriguing to me now is that I did meet some artists that are no longer with us, and I've written about them in my more recent work, my musical truth work. So uh, there was Brownstone. Do you remember an R&B group called Brownstone? 5 Miles to
Not
Empty,
really, no.
if songs like that. Yeah, so it's three girls, and I met them one time. They were supporting Blackstreet at the Royal Albert Hall in London, and I interviewed them backstage, and they were kind of flirting with me and seducing me and stuff, and that was fun. But there was one of the group members, Charmaine Maxey Maxwell, and she died a few years ago in some very strange circumstances. She was in a relationship with this guy Soul Shock of Soul Shock and Carlin. So they were producers. I think he might have been out of Sweden, if I remember correctly. But she died when she is said to have fallen through a pane of glass, a window pane on a patio with a glass in her hand, like a champagne glass or something. And the glass cut her jugular. So what were the chances of that? Seems a bit strange. I also met Aaliyah, the R&B singer. I met her in 1996, and I think she was, let's see, she was very young then. She died in 2001 at the age of 22, so she would have been 17, I guess. Yeah, 17.
That's
And
before she did a couple of movies, right? Wasn't she in a movie with Jet Li or something and DMX and things like that?
yeah, she was in Romeo Must Die. She was in that film. And there was controversy with her in the 90s involving R. Kelly. So she was in a relationship with R. Kelly, and she actually got married to him in 1994 when she was 15 years of age. And this was discovered, and then the marriage was annulled. And of course, I was hearing stories about R. Kelly back then. If you moved in these sort of circles, if you were a DJ playing R&B and hip hop music, you were hearing stories about R. Kelly and P. Diddy, or Puffy, as he was known back then, Puff Daddy, back in the 90s. I was hearing about dodgy stuff that those guys were into, and there were sex tapes of R. Kelly that kept apparently circulating involving him with underage girls. But he just kept on getting away with it year after year after year, and nothing got done all the way through until just a few years ago when his past finally caught up with him, and he ended up going to jail for running effectively a sort of sex mind control harem involving many women kept against their will. But back in 94, he married Aaliyah, and that was a controversial story. And then Aaliyah died in 2001, 17 days before the events of 9/11, when she was doing a video shoot in the Bahamas. And she got on a private plane, light aircraft, with a few other people. And she was due to head back from the Bahamas. And the plane crashed a short distance from the runway, a few seconds after takeoff, and she was killed. And that was tragic because she was a great singer. She really stood out from other R&B singers. Her music was very different. She was very talented, and that kind of cut me up a bit because I'd met her and I found her to be very charming and very intelligent. And then another one is Guru, out of the group Gangstar. So I met him one time in 1999 in Amsterdam in Fat Beats record store. So I went into this record store to buy some vinyl, and then digging in the crates and shuffling through these records, standing next to me is Guru from Gangstar, who was one of my favorite rappers. I love that group. They put out some incredible rap records in the 90s. And I was like, "Are you Guru?" And he goes, yeah, man. And I said, wow. I said, I work for a radio station back in England. Would you be okay doing a quick interview with me? And he's like, yeah, let's do it, man. So we went down into the basement where the owners had a radio studio, the shop owners, and they let me use the equipment and record an interview with Guru. And I was really chuffed, and I thought, this is great, you know. And then, unfortunately, in 2010, Guru passed away, again in some very suspicious circumstances. I cover this in my Musical Truth Volume 1 book. There was this character called Solar, who was a producer who'd come into Guru's life after Guru had fallen out with DJ Premier, who was his original partner in the group, Gangstar. And so Solar started working with Guru, and his whole life just seemed to unravel from that point on. And according to, I mean, I carry the story in my book, but according to many, Solar exerted a kind of dark occult influence over Guru. And it's like he was working some kind of black magic or voodoo on him. And Guru just ended up passing away, and Solar just got away with it. Nothing got done to him. And that was another sort of sad end. So it really kind of made a difference when I'd met these artists to then hear years later that they'd passed away. And it's never the ones you want it to be. I mean, there's many
That's
artists.
messed up to say, but
Well, if news came in that certain artists that I've got in mind have passed away, I'd be like, cool, no
it's
regrets
about
there.
time.
But
Yeah, karma.
it's never those names. It's never the
Yes.
ones you want. Life is
Wow.
unfair. Have you noticed?
Uh-huh. Well, that kind of synchronistically goes into chapter 11, doesn't it? Because by the title, chapter 11, shits, shysters, and shaftings.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah, this is the world of promoters, dodgy promoters. So this is, you get to the end of the night and it's time to get paid. And the promoter is nowhere to be found. And you're chasing the guy around trying to get that envelope of money that is yours because you've fulfilled your obligation and DJ to the crowd all night. And that chapter is sort of humorous accounts of trying to track down that guy and get your money. And in some cases, having to make phone calls weeks after the event. And I've got a story in there of one guy who pretended to be Chinese. So I phoned him up. I concealed my phone number because it was obvious he'd been dodging my calls because he had caller ID. So I concealed my phone number or used somebody else's phone. And he answered in his regular voice. I could tell it was him. And then I said something. He could tell it was me. He knew I was after my money. And he pretended he was Chinese. He was like, "Oh no, he's not here right now." And I was like, "I know it's you. I want my money. I know it's you." And he was like, "Oh, I don't know what you say. I don't speak English. I sorry, I can't take the call. Goodbye." And then he put the phone down. And he really expects me to believe it's some Chinese dude that I've dialed at random and not him, you know? And then I've got another story about when I did get paid. I used to play in this very dodgy venue. It's like a warehouse. And it's the sort of place that you can imagine gangsters taking victims and like chaining them up, like in the Long Good Friday, and sort of beating them as they hung from chains from the ceiling. It was that kind of place. And when I used to have to get paid, I had to go down into the basement, into this like warren of dungeons. And I would be going deeper and deeper underground. And I'd end up in the office, so called. And there'd be all these dodgy characters, just look like total gangsters, stood around, and a couple of them would be stood at the door so you couldn't get out. And then you just have to hope that you are going to get paid and you get out of there okay. And I remember one time I got paid £250 in individual pound coins. So it's £250 coins in a butcher's carrier bag. And that was my pay for the night. And it's pretty clear that a lot of these nightclubs were money laundering operations for organized crime. It was very, very clear. And there's all kinds of drugs being sold and stuff like that. So, yeah, certainly saw a thing or two. And I don't know. I don't really believe in guardian angels, but I did escape unscathed from many a dodgy situation like that. I also escaped unarrested from so many of these COVID rallies, anti-COVID rallies that I went on in London and other places in 2020 and 2021. I mean, the police here were on a total arrest fest, and they were just arresting everyone, and they were plucking people out from the crowd all around me, but I just managed to escape it. And sometimes I was on the mic on a rig, addressing the crowd, and I still managed to escape. So yeah, I think there's an element of luck in there somewhere. I've not always felt it, but when I think back on some of those stories about those dodgy places I used to play, yeah, it's a miracle I've still got use of all of my limbs.
Okay. So looking again, some of these chapter titles, is some of that out of, I can imagine, DJ Nightmares.
Yeah. So I think in that chapter, that's where I invited some of my DJ friends to elect some of their stories of stuff that they've gone through. So there's a story in there from my good friend DJ D, who's a female DJ from Australia, Sydney, Australia. And she recounts a story of an absolute nightmare scenario. She got booked to go to the Middle East. I think it was Oman or somewhere like that. And she flew out with this other guy, this other DJ from Australia, all the way to Oman. And everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Like flight delays, then there was nobody there to pick them up from the airport. And then there was the sound check didn't get done the way it was supposed to. And the hotel wasn't booked. And they had no chance to go and rest before the gig after traveling for like 24 hours. And there was nowhere to wash. And just all kinds of absolute nightmare situations. They had to lie down on the floor to preserve energy because they were so tired for like minutes at a time. But Dee says the minute she got up on the decks and started playing, that natural adrenaline, the energy just pumps in, and it carried her through, and she had an amazing set. And I can relate to that because I've DJ'd so many times where I've just been ill, I've had the flu, but back then, because I was a self-employed DJ, if I didn't work, I didn't get paid, and I couldn't afford to miss the money. So I would drag myself out of my bed with the flu and go out and DJ. This is pre-COVID days, of course, where you wouldn't get turned away at the door if you had so much as a sniffle.
Mhm.
Or I'd be just completely knackered, just tired from several nights of not sleeping properly. But the minute you get up on there and you start playing and you connect with the crowd, you make that energetic connection with them and you buzz off them, you feed off the crowd. There's definitely an exchange of energy that goes on, which is why, thinking in my contemporary mindset, that's why these major shows like the US Super Bowl halftime show and the Grammys and all these big events that they do are two-way exchanges of energy, and they want the audience focusing their attention on certain symbolism and certain themes that they're promoting through these events because they recognize that these people are energetically empowering these things into being by focusing their attention on them. So I had little glimpses into that dynamic in my DJing years because, when you're entertaining the crowd and they're loving your tunes and they're jumping about and they're whooping and cheering, and that comes back to you as kind of like a feedback loop. As the DJ, you're drawing energy off of that, and it makes you play even harder and even stronger and draw out even better tunes, and you just feed off each other in that way. So that's an amazing thing. But the DJ Nightmares chapter is when things go wrong, basically. And again, it's delivered with sardonic, dry wit, because that seems to be my default style when it comes to my sense of humor. It's very sarcastic and deadpan. And I think that comes through in the writing.
Okay. And came to mind to ask about like that DJD, like certain DJs in the past that you may have had, a good relation with, are you may have spoken on this before, but how many of them do you feel or have you been able to approach with what you know now and they've opened up and accepted or been like like yeah that makes sense, or been like, what, you one of those retarded conspiracy theorists, get out of here with that bull. Is she one that would have been like this, or well?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Dee is still a really good friend of mine, and I went to Australia last year and hooked up with her, and we had a great time. She didn't come to my talk event, but we just hooked up socially, and she's a lot of fun. She's a very talented DJ. She's a turntablist. She's got, better skills than me. She's amazing on the decks, and she's someone who she knows what I talk about, and she's seen my stuff. And I don't think she's 100% in agreement, but it's not stopped us being able to be friends. But that is a rarity. So if I think about my circle of friends 20 years ago, I would say 1 to 2% are people I still speak to, and 98% have been lost. And they've just fallen off. So they just stopped messaging me when I started going public with the stuff that I talk about now. Around about the time of the first Musical Truth book, I
Right.
noticed I was getting defriended off of Facebook. And, yeah, people were just dwindling and fizzling away. By that point, I was sort of winding up my DJ activities anyway, so it wasn't really a full-time job for me anymore. I stopped doing it full-time in 2014. But yeah, it's quite telling that about 98% of the people that I used to count as really good friends no longer are. I mean, there was one guy who was a great mate of mine while I was DJing, and after I woke up, quote unquote, and I started posting about many of these false flag terror events that were happening in the UK. And it was so obvious to me that they were state sponsored psyops, dreamt up at Tavistock, probably. And so I started questioning elements of these events. And he sent me a message, this guy. I've been friends with him for about 15 years up to that point. And he said, the next time I see you, I'm going to punch your fucking lights out.
Hmm.
You absolute wanker. How dare you question these events? Where's your sensitivity? Where's your humanity? And I would say the irony of the situation is that I cared about those events being psyops because of my humanity, because I don't like being lied to, and I don't like millions of other people being lied to either. But in his way of seeing it, I was insensitive for questioning the official narrative because whatever the BBC Evening News tells you, that's the truth. And I just thought, wow, this guy that I've shared all these DJ adventures with will turn on me that quickly because I ask a question. I question something. That tells you a lot about where people's consciousness and mentality is at, I think. So now
Definitely.
I've got no regrets about that dynamic taking place because I've got some great friends now all over the world. I've met some wonderful people, and these friends are far better in caliber than the ones I used to meet in the DJing world. I do regret losing some friendships because I got on great with these people when I was mixing with them and bumped into them in clubs and stuff. But as soon as I started commenting about things that really matter, like truth, that sort of thing, they didn't want to
Freedom.
know. Yeah, they didn't want to know. So I was like, okay, well, then that's the way it is.
Okay. Two things standing out to me here, chapter titles. You may have touched on it already, but they just, I don't know, they look interesting to me. The Enemy Within. I'm trying to think back then, 15, 20 years ago, The Enemy Within. And then also, I guess maybe connected, Ups and Downs. So like chapter 16 and 19. Well, what's up with those chapters?
So the enemy within was a reference to haters, other DJ haters. So,
Ah,
others in the game who are jealous of your success. So I used to get haters, and I was never really that big. I mean, I was reasonably prominent within my field, but I was never a household name. But I still used to piss other DJs off. They used to think that I had ideas above my station. To be honest, I mean, full disclosure, Ivan, I used to carry myself with a bit of ego back in those days, with a bit of swagger. And you kind of have to in that game because it's very cutthroat, it's very competitive. You've got to be a bit cocky, you've got to be a bit sure of yourself, And particularly if you're a white guy in a black music scene, you've got to sort of walk with a bit of a swagger. So I was a bit of an arsehole like that, had a bit of an ego. And that used to
okay.
rub some people up the wrong way. I like to think I've lost all of that now. I mean, some may differ, but that's the way I see it. And then the other one was Ups and Downs, which is about drugs. So, the DJ game is full of drugs, narcotics of choice. And that mainly occurs within the dance house music world, electronic dance music. That's where you find ecstasy, MDMA, and other kinds of drugs. Within the black music field, it's mainly weed, marijuana. That doesn't really much go beyond that. But I'm someone who, in all my DJing years, never did drugs. And people find that hard to believe. They're like, oh, yeah, yeah, try and deny it if you like. But no, I never did. Uh, because I wasn't in the electronic dance music field, I didn't really have ready access to ecstasy every weekend. So I never did it. And then, most of my friends were smoking weed, and that never really did it for me. Tried it a few times, didn't particularly enjoy it, so just never bothered. But Ups and Downs is talking about many of the casualties of the DJ world who aren't able to avoid those temptations and how it can end pretty ugly in many cases for them.
I see. All right. And then wrapping it up, as far as chapters in the book, is this a glimpse to your awakening? You mentioned the great gig in the sky. It's like, ooh.
Yeah. Well, that title was taken from the Pink Floyd track of the same name that appeared on Dark Side of the Moon. And it's me getting a bit reflective at the end. So I've spent 19 chapters just talking about trivial nonsense, basically. And then in the last chapter, I'm thinking about, well, what happens when you get too old to be doing this lark? And back then, I was looking at many of the world's top DJs, and they were getting into their 40s. And I was like, oh, getting a bit old there to be doing this. And here we are 20 years later, and these guys are in their 60s and 70s in some cases, and they're still doing it. No signs of slowing down. But I was thinking back then, what do you do when you don't want to be doing this DJing stuff anymore? And like I say, in 2014, I started to wrap up full time. All I've really done since then is the odd parties here and there, a few festival gigs. And I was thinking, well, what do I do with my life when I don't want to be that embarrassing old granddad behind the decks in my latter years? And I think there's a clue as to what was going to come next in the very last line of that book. So at the very end of the chapter, I say, I can't really imagine what else I could be doing with my life. And then the last line goes, except perhaps writing another book. And it turns out I've written 5 since, with a 6 on the way. So it's like I was getting a glimpse into my future career as an author and researcher. And I just wonder if I subconsciously knew at the time of writing that book that old life, that old way of seeing the world was coming to an end. And I was kind of getting an inkling as to a new chapter about to open in my life, as it did the following year. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I know while you were doing some of the great work, podcasts and things like that, you still had like a side gig thing that you would do, like some underground little closeted radio station thing. Was that like within this book's time frame or a little after or
I think when this book came out, I was just about to start on a station in Oxford called, no, which one was it? Oxford's 107.9 FM. Not a particularly imaginative station name. But yeah, I went on to do another station in Oxford, which was legal, but it was run along the lines of a pirate radio station. So it was broadcast from a shed in this guy's back garden, this Asian guy from Oxford. And he let the station director rig up all these microwave links and all these radio links and stuff, transmitters, so that we could broadcast out of his shed in his garden. So all the DJs would have to bring their records and their decks and stuff and trudge across the mud in his garden. And so many times people slipped up in the mud. I did myself. Slipped up, covered in mud. Then you have to stand there for 2 hours doing a radio show covered in mud. It was ghetto. And all around the studio was evidence of the previous night's party. So I don't know what was going on there, but the guy that hosted this place certainly seemed to know how to party. So you'd go in on a Saturday and you'd be the first DJ in there, and you'd find like cocaine debris, a champagne bottle would be rolling around, a woman's high-heeled shoe, and you think, God damn, that looks like one hell of a party. And it was just so ghetto. It's like a pirate radio station, but it was fully legal. It was licensed and everything. But I lost that gig in 2020, so I was doing my shows remotely from home for obvious reasons. And then I accidentally let a track with the word motherfucker in it go out on air. And the station director called me and said, right, that's it. You're terminated. Your show ends now. And he pulled it from the air. So that was the last legal radio show that I did in 2020.
what was the show that was coming out of there? It's the one that you still carried on right now, right?
The Sound of Now.
The Sound of Now.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
right.
So I do the sound of now, and I post it on Mixcloud these days, and it's 2 hours of soulful, uplifting house now. So I've switched up my style. I don't play rap, hip hop, or urban music anymore because that entire genre has gone totally down the crapper. I mean, it's just unrecognizable from what it was. So I want nothing to do with it anymore. So I play soulful, uplifting house, and I find it's the only contemporary music I can stand to listen to anymore. But I do find it very uplifting and inspiring, and I love putting it together every week. It's a welcome distraction from all this dark, doom-laden information that I wallow in, probably more than is healthy. So it's good to escape inside that music, and I still do that show now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get those emails. Okay, so that ends the book, the chapters, but you do have appendixes in here. And looking over those look kind of interesting as well, especially appendix number 2, music is the answer. And then appendix 3, you have a whole bunch of little things scattered here that caught my attention. The death of vinyl. That's interesting. And then dance music and urban music, bouncers. Why? And then R&B club scene going down the tube. So all these little things, and Michael Jackson, what now? So cover real quick these appendixes. Like, where did this come from? Is this stuff recently that you added, or was this stuff that was there before in the original?
This is from back in the day. This is from the time frame of
Okay.
when I was first writing the book, so 2005, 2006. And most of the appendix sections consist of the chat forum on my website. So I used to have a DJ website, and I used to have this thread running, or several threads running, where my DJ friends and fans of the music would jump on and offer their opinions on stuff that was going on. So it was pretty much ahead of its time. It's like Facebook these days, or, a Reddit thread or something like that. But I used to run it on my website. And so I've got subjects like DJs moaning about how CDs are replacing vinyl. And they're like, oh, CDs will never catch on, and it's all a gimmick and stuff. And here we are now, and 99.9% of DJs play off of memory sticks. They carry all their tunes for the night on a bloody thumb drive. So no one saw that coming back in the day. And, all these purists are saying, oh, you're not a proper DJ if you don't play vinyl. Well, then there's not many proper DJs around anymore, is there? And then there's the Michael Jackson thing. So this was like the second legal case against Michael Jackson that had been brought, not the Geordie Chandler one. It was the one after that. And during the time frame of this book being written, Michael Jackson was acquitted. And it's people's opinions on that, like, oh, I think he did it. No, of course he didn't do it. He was stitched up. Well, what does he do from here? Is he still going to be able to sell records? And of course, he was dead within another 3 years of that. So, yeah, that's why I think this book is an interesting glimpse back in time. It's a snapshot of what the world was like in sort of 2005 and what people
Time
were
capsule.
thinking. Yeah, very much so.
Along those lines, one other little thing you have here is top 10 albums, your input needed. So if we were to ask you right now, I know you have it listed in here, but back then, top 10 albums, all right? But back then, and then now, knowing what you know now, and like you said, you stopped playing, hip hop and stuff like that. If we were to ask you right now, more or less, not, doesn't have to be the top 10 altogether, but, a couple of maybe 4 or 5 of your top ones back then that you're like, oh, yeah, definitely. And then some that have changed today that you'll be like, no, but today, these are my top 5 or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting to reflect on. I don't think I'd really have changed any of the albums as such, because even though I might have found out stuff about the artists, it doesn't take anything away from the art that is their music. And I'm someone that can still enjoy an artist's output, even if I no longer like the artist. So,
okay, well, I have your list right here. I'll
right.
go ahead and read that list for you from back in the day,
Yeah,
and
go
you
ahead,
tell
'cause
me yay or no.
I can't remember what they were.
All right. So let's start backwards. 10th, back then, you had A Tribe Called Quest, Midnight Marauders from 1993.
Okay, yeah. Still love Quest.
Number 9, Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells, 1973.
Still a classic.
Number 8, Human League, Dare, 1981.
Yep, love it.
Number 7, the Bee Gees Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, 77.
Awesome soundtrack.
Number 6, Jerutha Damaja, Wrath of the Math,
Oh, J.
1996.
Rue the Damager. Yeah, that's an
Jerutha
incredible
Damaja.
score.
Okay. I put too much accent on that. Number
Ivan, come
5,
on, man. I thought you were a hip hop head. What's going on?
what? Me? Never. Number 5, Notorious B.I.G. Ready to Die, 94.
Uh, yeah, I mean that's one that I may leave out now because it's so heavily influenced by Puffy, and I don't like Puffy, so I might jettison that one these days.
Aha. Number 4, Dr. Dre, The Chronic from 92.
Well, it's still an awesome album. I mean, I can see how it was pushing agendas, but it's still great music in my book.
Number 3, Michael Jackson, Thriller, 1982.
Yeah, all-time classic.
Number 2, Prince, Purple Rain from 84.
Yeah, see, I was thinking that would be number one. I think these days that might be my number one.
Aha, so you may flip with number 1 back then was Snoop Doggy Dogg, Doggy Style from 93.
See, I think that's one I would get rid of. That's interesting, isn't it? My number one back then is one
Mm-hmm.
that I would probably throw out now. So, yeah, it's amazingly produced by Dr. Dre, but really it's all bitches, hoes, and weed and gang banging and drive-by shootings and stuff. And I think the lyrical content is just so slack. There's no positivity in that album at all. It's just helping to degrade and debase hip hop culture and black communities and stuff. So, yeah, I think the Snoop Dogg one would have to go. Prince can go to number one. And there's probably a few others I'd chuck in there now that weren't in there back in the day.
Off the top of your head, 1 or 2 that maybe
Well,
needs to be in there?
Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon should be in there really because it's an awesome album. And
Is that something you used to listen to back then when you wrote this book, or you weren't too aware of it, into that kind of music, and that's why I didn't make this kind of list?
yeah, that's it. I wasn't listening to Pink Floyd back then. They just weren't on my radar at all. But again, even though I can see that they're a controlled band, their output was amazing, and that album is an all-time staple classic, so it should be in there. And probably Fleetwood Mac Rumours as well. I'd probably throw that one in these days.
Oh, there you go. All right, Mark. Well, I guess we've touched on quite a bit here, gave some people,
Sure.
good preview of what's in there and hopefully what their appetite to low, the old Mark, the back in the day Mark, the Mark. Did you have hair back then? Or did you kind of keep it short, kind of? So the bald isn't
Yeah,
much
I
of a
had
difference.
more. I had more
Yeah,
back then, yeah. Yeah.
more towards the front, not just towards the back and the sides.
Yeah, well, I think what I'm going to do over the Christmas period when I've got a bit of downtime is dig out some old photos and scan them and stick them up online. Just some photos from that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? To accompany this book, photos from that sort of time period of good times in the clubs. Because believe it or not, Ivan, I was actually happy back in those days. Can you imagine? I was happy.
Via the ignorance is bliss mode.
Exactly that. Yeah. Because I thought, well, this is the world. It consists of parties and clubs and, hanging out with friends and chasing girls. And this is life. Life is good. And if that's all life really were, then yeah, it would be good. But as we know, it's not quite as simple as that, is it?
I know. Dang it. Something had to wake you up, and now look at now you actually know the truth and are trying to do something about it. What a
Truth
shame,
is a
huh?
cruel, cruel bitch.
All right, Mark. Well, then, so new book, regular places to find it. Is it available already? Is it coming out? What's the deal? Give people some info on this.
Sure. Well, it's on Amazon. If you want to be successful as an author, you got to be on Amazon. So you can get a copy on Amazon. But if anyone wants to get one from me direct, you can drop me an email to markdevlin2022@protonmail.com and I can post those out. It's a bit difficult to get them out to the United States, to be honest, because the postage is so much and there's all kinds of ball aches with customs, filling out customs forms. And also, I've had a lot of books go missing. They get seized by customs, probably rogue operators that just want a free book for themselves. So it's a bit of a ball ache to post them out internationally, in which case people might want to just bite the bullet and get it from Amazon. But in the UK, I can post them out, and most places in Europe. And there is an ebook version of it as well, a Kindle version. So anyone that reads books on Kindle, you can get that from Amazon. I want to do an audiobook, which will be on Audible, but it will be a few months down the line because these things take months to do and I have to sit there and narrate it. So that'll be coming a bit further down the line. But the print version is on Amazon. I think it's also going to be through Barnes and Noble and a few other retailers as well. But that's where you can get it.
Okay. And then your website links through there too?
Yep. So there'll be links to where you can get it on the website. My main website is djmarkdevlin.com, and you can link from there to all my video channels and everything else that I do.
All right. Well, Mark, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for helping me get some of these cobwebs off of my podcasting and interviewing, time off, because I've been gone for a little while too.
Oh, it's been a minute?
State of the world. Yeah, it's been a minute. So, but yeah, this was good. So,
all right, man. Well, not exactly the guy next door. The guy over in Phoenix speaks, but I appreciate you hosting me on yet another one of these, man. And I've got a new book coming out next year, so we'll have to do it all over again then.
This is just a vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up